So Paladin has been a bit of a black sheep in terms of Endwalker. Like for a while, it had a pretty unique playstyle when compared to its three counterparts. It's also consistently been one of, if not the least used raid tank going all the way back to Asphodelos. But in 6.3, the narrative seemingly shifted when the job received a complete rework. Now I remember covering it when 6.3 dropped. I'll leave a link to my initial thoughts below. But to summarize, I thought it was a decent step in the right direction. It really solved the issue I had with the more strict rotation, and it made raiding less stressful for me. We couldn't really tell what the impact that change would have on the popularity of the job, at least until 6.4. Yes, we did have the top release, but not every Savage Raider does ultimates, so I wanted to wait until we were a decent way into 6.4 to talk about the state of Paladin. So we're gonna look over the numbers and see if Paladin is faring just a bit better in the eyes of the raiders than it has been earlier in Endwalker. And just a disclaimer, I will be using FF logs as my main source of data. Here is all the reasons this is a flawed idea. 1. PlayStation players cannot use it, meaning we can only pull data from PC players. 2. Players have to opt into logging, meaning our pool gets even smaller. 3. Only players who really care about their performance will even bother to use it. FF logs is only used to enhance performance and improve as a player. A more casual player probably doesn't even know it exists or just doesn't care. Now, you may hear this and go, Shizzle, why are you using FF logs if it really isn't perfect? That's a good question. First, for the purpose of this video, I really don't care about anything other than rating stats. Second, there's still a pretty decent sized pool of players who log. Although it's not quite as large of a pool as a game like WoW, there's still thousands of logs to go through. Third, players who log are typically performance-minded anyways, so chances are, if you are watching this video, you care about performance and stats. And fourth, it's my video, shut up. But seriously, I did want to put that disclaimer in, mainly to say that this is a limited data pool, it's imperfect, and not indicative of the wider player base. But let's look at the numbers, starting with Asphodelos. Before starting though, how about dropping a like on the video? It helps the channel grow, and it makes me happy. Now, I'm not interested in damage numbers. I'll mention it when I think it's relevant, but tank damage really doesn't matter unless you're a week 1 raider. Instead, I want to look at the number of parses. So in 6.0, Paladin had 41,028 parses, dead last behind Dark Knight with 46,002 parses. In 6.1, things don't get a lot better for Paladin. Once again, behind Dark Knight in last place with only 9,857 parses. So, why is that? Again, we can only infer as to the reasons, but I don't think it's damage. If players cared about damage, Warrior would be on the bottom instead of on the top. No, if I really had to infer, my best guess would be it's the playstyle of the class. Like I mentioned before, pre-6.3 Paladin had a very strict rotation that didn't resonate with a lot of players. Don't get me wrong, it had its fans, but as the data shows, it really wasn't a popular pick. Our current database being raiders that log. And it's a similar story with Abyssos. In 6.2, Paladin is about 15,000 parses behind Warrior. This time I think we can partially blame it on balancing and damage. For at least week 1, Abyssos was notorious for being overtuned. And I do always like to call back to this video.
We have 2 f***ing damage downs, and I swapped a gunbreaker, and what is this SC stupid?
So that would certainly explain it, but in 6.2, Paladin is still the least logged tank. Now, Abyssos lasted from 6.2 through 6.3, so we actually have a very interesting comparison coming up. But first, there's 2 other pieces of high-end content I want to look over, just to be thorough. First, Dragonsong's Reprise released. For Ultimates, the pool is just a lot smaller, but again, I just want to be thorough. In Dragonsong's Reprise, it's a very similar story with Paladin being the least logged tank, but in 6.2, we got our first Criterion dungeon. So let's look at both normal and savage. With a record-shattering 159 total tank parses in normal, Paladin actually sits at number 2. Now going on to savage with a absolutely groundbreaking 7 parses. Paladin sits at a perfect second place with 2. God, they really fumbled these. Joking aside, I don't think most players who even bothered to do Criterion dungeons or their savage counterparts even bothered to log. Why would you? I just find the 7 tank bars thing funny. But now we're on to 6.3 post-Paladin rework. Does the narrative shift? Well, looking at Abyssos at least, Paladin still does have the least amount of logs. But the margin is definitely smaller, most likely due to the excitement of the rework. We also have top out at this point, and Paladin is still last. But this could also be due to mechanics being easier with other tanks, I'm not really up to date on my ultimate knowledge. So if anyone wants to help provide a bit of extra context in the comments, please do. We're now on to 6.4, the current patch, and wouldn't you know it, Paladin is not dead last in Anabesos. Paladin is actually third place with 40,411 parses behind Gunbreaker with 45,316 parses. So, what happened? First, I definitely think the rework has something to do with it. Again, we can really only infer, but the general consensus to my knowledge is that most players are indeed happy with the rework, even if some of the old Paladin players just feel like the job lost its spark. On top of the rework, tank balance, and frankly the balance of this tier in general, is just kind of great. Coming off of Abyssos, it seems like they really did focus on getting the balancing right the first time, and the wave of tank buffs in 6.4 definitely doesn't hurt. Now, there could be other factors, including the actual fights themselves. This doesn't happen often to my knowledge, but sometimes certain fights are just easier with certain jobs. I wouldn't know this firsthand though, because I actually haven't gotten the chance to clear Savage yet. They really had to plop this raid tier right in between some of the biggest game releases of probably the decade. Regardless, it seems like Paladin rework at least somewhat did its job, and alongside some balancing and perhaps tank players looking for something new, Paladin is actually looking pretty good right now. In fact, all tanks are. I've heard some absolutely amazing things about this tier, and if normal is anything to go by, I should be having a blast. But that's all I got. Help get us over that 1,000 sub mark. We are over halfway there. Thank you so much for watching and take care. That rhymed.